What if the life you knew, your identity, your very title, could be erased in a single moment? Imagine sitting in a palace corridor, heart racing, as your family whispers secrets you were never meant to hear. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, that moment has arrived. The corridors of Buckingham Palace are alive with tension, the air thick with unease. King Charles, lying in a hospital bed battling the ravages of cancer, has made a shocking request, one that could strip Harry and Meghan of all their royal titles, leaving them adrift, severed from the monarchy and from the life they've known. And it is Princess Anne, the quietly formidable royal, who holds the key to revealing his dying wish. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Princess Anne, often called the Queen of Steadfastness in royal circles, has rarely spoken openly about family disputes. Yet here she is, 74 years old, standing at the edge of revelation. Her eyes carry decades of observation, loyalty, and the heavy burden of truth. She has seen the tensions between father and son, between the institution of the monarchy and the unpredictable paths taken by Harry and Meghan. And now, in this rare and unprecedented disclosure, she has chosen to speak. The weight of her words is immense, because they do not merely hint at discord. They expose a royal verdict that could reshape the family forever. The question that hangs over this revelation is simple yet terrifying. Why would a king, at the end of his life, decide to erase his son and daughter-in-law from the monarchy entirely? What could drive a father, who has known both the pain of public scrutiny and the complications of family loyalty, to make such an irrevocable decree? And what does it say about the fragility of titles, of status, of the life many aspire to as the ultimate pinnacle of achievement and recognition? As we unpack this story, consider the stakes. Harry and Meghan have lived under a microscope, their every move analyzed, critiqued, and celebrated in turn. They have navigated public scrutiny with a mixture of charm, defiance, and strategy. But even with all the power of celebrity and media attention, they face a threat that is more intimate and absolute than anything outside the palace could conjure. The king's wish is a private weapon, a command that moves silently through the palace halls and could, with a stroke of authority, erase a legacy built over generations. Yet there is more beneath the surface. This is not simply a matter of titles or ceremonial privileges. There is a deeper, more human story here, a tale of loyalty, betrayal, familial obligation, and the devastating tension between personal desire and inherited duty. For Princess Anne, the disclosure is both duty and burden. She is bound by love for her father, respect for the institution, and an unyielding commitment to truth. Her revelation is an emotional earthquake, shaking foundations that have long been thought stable. Princess Anne's entrance into this narrative is dramatic, yet precise. She does not sensationalize. She does not exaggerate. She delivers facts tempered by emotion, ensuring that every word lands with the weight it deserves. When she reveals King Charles's request, it is not shouted across tabloids or framed in headlines. It is spoken quietly, almost reverently, to those who must know, the people who stand closest to the truth. And for Harry and Meghan, that truth is both shocking and shattering. Their world, already fraught with uncertainty and public scrutiny, suddenly tilts on an axis they could never have anticipated. Now consider the timing. King Charles, weakened by illness and confined to a hospital bed, is acutely aware of the fragility of life. The urgency of his request is compounded by the knowledge that he may not have another opportunity to assert his wishes. There is no room for hesitation. Every moment matters. And yet, in a world where public image and private intent often clash, delivering such a decree is fraught with risk. How do you enforce a dying wish against a son and daughter-in-law who have already distanced themselves from the traditional royal path? How do you reconcile love and duty with consequences that are irreversible? This story is further complicated by secrecy and strategy. Princess Anne, in revealing her father's request, is navigating a minefield of palace politics. Every word is calculated, every disclosure deliberate. Yet there is a raw honesty that cannot be ignored. She speaks not merely as the king's daughter, but as a witness to history, a guardian of truths that the public has only glimpsed in whispers and leaked rumors. And her voice carries authority precisely because it is rarely heard in such a context. When she speaks, the palace listens, and the consequences ripple far beyond the hospital walls. But the human element is inescapable. Imagine Harry, once a young prince enveloped in royal privilege, now confronted with the prospect of being stripped of his identity. The titles, the ceremonial roles, the very recognition that framed his life could vanish overnight. And Meghan, navigating not only her own legacy but the implications for her children and her public persona, faces a decision that could define her forever. In that moment, the gravity of the king's request is more than bureaucratic. It is deeply personal, intimately threatening, and undeniably transformative. What is the reaction of the royal household? The whispers in corridors, the hushed meetings, the urgent exchanges between aides and advisors. These are all signs that history is in motion. Every staff member, from long-serving aides to palace officials, senses the gravity of the moment. And yet, even amidst the chaos, a quiet determination emerges. Princess Anne, steadfast and resolute, becomes the messenger, the steward of a truth that will inevitably confront Harry and Meghan. The palace is tense, the air thick with anticipation, and the world beyond Buckingham Palace waits, unaware of the storm that is silently brewing within. It is essential to pause and reflect on what this story represents. At its core, it is a narrative of power and vulnerability. Titles and status, which often appear immutable, are suddenly shown to be fragile constructs, dependent not on public acclaim but on private decisions. The monarchy, a centuries-old institution, is revealed to be simultaneously enduring and perilously human. Loyalty can be demanded, betrayal can be enacted, and consequences, no matter how unimaginable, can unfold with a single decision. For viewers, this raises a compelling question. If even princes and princesses can face such upheaval, what does that say about all of us, bound as we are by societal structures and family expectations? As the introduction draws toward its conclusion, the tension heightens. Princess Anne's revelation is not simply a matter of information. It is a narrative pivot, a moment that changes the trajectory of every character involved. The audience is left with a sense of anticipation, an awareness that what comes next will not only affect Harry and Meghan, but will resonate across history, media, and public consciousness. The stakes are immense, and every subsequent chapter will deepen our understanding of the consequences, the maneuvers, and the emotional turbulence that follows. And just as the viewer begins to absorb the gravity of this revelation, a final tease lingers. Princess Anne has hinted at a private meeting, a conversation in which Charles spelled out his wishes in detail. The content of that discussion, the tone, the implications, these remain tantalizingly just out of reach, setting the stage for the unfolding drama. For Harry and Meghan, for the palace staff, for the public watching from around the world, the next moments will define the legacy of the king's last wish. And for Princess Anne, the weight of disclosure is only beginning to settle. What she revealed next would leave Harry and Meghan scrambling, forever altering their place in history. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to carry a truth so heavy it could break families apart? For Princess Anne, the answer is all too real. Standing in the dimly lit corridor of Buckingham Palace, she knew that what she was about to reveal could shake the foundations of the monarchy itself. She wasn't acting out of malice. She wasn't trying to create scandal for the tabloids. This was a matter of duty, a commitment to her father's last wishes and the integrity of the institution he has led his entire life. And yet, she also understood the human cost. Her words would hit her brother, her nephew, and the public with the force of a tidal wave. The palace was unusually quiet that morning. The usual hum of activity, footsteps in the hallway, distant echoes of servants and staff, the soft shuffle of security, was replaced by a tense hush. Charles was in critical condition, struggling against the disease that had confined him to his hospital bed. Every breath he took was labored, every word weighed with consequence, and had spent the early hours observing him, watching for any sign of clarity, any flicker of decisiveness. And then, with a mixture of solemnity and resolve, she was summoned to a private sitting room, away from prying eyes, away from ears that could leak sensitive information. She knew what she had to do. Deliver a message that could forever redefine Harry and Meghan's place in the royal hierarchy. She began carefully, as she always does. Princess Anne's voice, while firm, carried a subtle tremor, not of fear, but of awareness, the awareness that this was a moment that would be etched into history. She recounted her father's exact words, the tone of his voice, the way he had looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Harry and Meghan must no longer hold royal titles, she said quietly, almost reverently, as though speaking aloud made the decree more real. It is my wish that they be erased from the official records of the monarchy, effective immediately upon my final confirmation. The room seemed to freeze. Time slowed, and could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. Every advisor, every staff member who had been present knew instinctively that this wasn't a casual suggestion or a minor adjustment to palace protocol. This was a royal verdict, a command from a king facing the fragility of his own mortality. It was absolute, and it was devastating. For Princess Anne, recounting this to the aides and confidants in the room was one thing. But the implications for Harry and Meghan were another matter entirely, and had long observed the tension between Charles and Harry, the way resentment had occasionally flared, the subtle but persistent disagreements over tradition, public appearances, and private decisions. And Meghan, always strong-willed, always strategic, had consistently challenged conventions, seeking to define her own path within, and often outside of, the constraints of royal expectations. To strip them of their titles was not merely punitive, it was transformative. It was, in a way, a final lesson in authority, loyalty, and consequence. And paused, taking a moment to reflect on what this meant. Her father's health was deteriorating rapidly. Every day, every hour, could be the last he had to assert his wishes. The stakes were escalating. In a family where appearances often mask true intentions, she understood that transparency was both a weapon and a shield. By delivering Charles's final instructions, and was attempting to protect the monarchy from potential chaos, while simultaneously preparing Harry and Meghan for a reality they had likely never imagined. He sank into the velvet armchair, gripping the arms so tightly that his knuckles turned white. How could Charles, his father, make such a decision? Was this the culmination of years of tension, of misunderstandings, of emotional distance? Or was there something deeper at play, something calculated, intentional, meant to punish, to teach, or to assert power even in weakness? These questions swirled in Harry's mind, each more painful than the last. And then Meghan entered. Her expression, a mixture of controlled shock and immediate calculation, only amplified his anxiety. "Harry," she said, her voice steady but sharp, "do you realize what this means? Not just for us, but for the children." He knew she was right. Titles, public recognition, the protections afforded by royal status. These weren't merely ceremonial. They were a shield, a platform, and, in many ways, a safety net. Stripped of them, they would be vulnerable not only socially, but legally, financially, and emotionally. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I can't believe it. I just can't believe it," he muttered, voice cracking. "All these years. I thought I understood him. I thought I knew my father." He paused, breathing heavily. "And now this." His words trailed off, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. What made the news even more unbearable was its permanence. The king's wish wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a temporary measure. It was a formal request, intended to be executed swiftly, with absolute authority. Anne's delivery had been precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. This was no casual family disagreement that could be patched over with a private conversation or public appeasement. This was final, unless, of course, they could find a way to challenge it, to appeal, to resist. But even then, the odds seemed stacked against them. Harry's mind raced through every possible course of action. Legal challenges? Media campaigns? Appealing to allies within the royal household? Each option came with risks, with the potential to escalate conflict rather than resolve it. And then there was the public. How would the world perceive a prince and his wife openly defying the king's last wishes? Would the narrative frame them as rebels, as victims, or as ungrateful? Every possibility was fraught with peril, every decision a potential scandal in waiting. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a flicker of resolve. Harry was not one to be passive in the face of adversity. He had navigated media storms, personal betrayals, and public scrutiny before. But this was different. This was intimate, personal, and deeply tied to family loyalty. It cut deeper than any tabloid headline, deeper than any public misstep. This was his father, his heritage, and his own identity hanging in the balance. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, grappling with the duality of anger and love. Could he reconcile the father he knew with the authority figure issuing this devastating decree? Could he find empathy for a man weakened by illness, yet still determined to exert control? And what of Meghan? She was a constant presence in his thoughts, a partner, a confidant, a strategist in her own right. Her strength and intelligence were both a comfort and a reminder that they would need every ounce of cunning to navigate the coming storm. Harry, Meghan interrupted, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. We have to think strategically. This isn't just emotional, it's tactical. If we act impulsively, we risk losing everything. But if we plan carefully, we may have a chance to protect ourselves and the kids. Her words, calm and precise, cut through the haze of his panic. He nodded, trying to ground himself in reason, even as the emotional undercurrent threatened to sweep him away. And yet, as he considered their options, another thought surfaced, one he hadn't dared to voice. What if resistance was impossible? What if the king's wish, even in his critical state, could not be undone? The titles, the recognition, the very legacy that had defined his life. What if it all vanished? The possibility was unbearable. Every memory of childhood, of family gatherings, of public duties and private moments, seemed to flicker and fade. And with it, a sense of personal identity that he had long taken for granted. Harry's gaze fell on a framed photograph of Charles, smiling, holding a young Harry in his arms. The juxtaposition was jarring, the warmth of fatherly affection against the harshness of a dying wish that threatened to erase him. Could love survive this kind of betrayal? Could family endure when the very foundation of trust was shattered? These questions gnawed at him, demanding answers that were neither simple nor satisfying. As the day wore on, Harry's emotional state oscillated between fury, despair, and determination. He found himself revisiting every conversation, every slight, every decision he had made in his life. Was there a moment he could point to, a misstep that justified the king's extreme measure? Or was this simply the culmination of long-standing tension, magnified by illness and urgency? Each reflection brought no clarity, only more questions, more emotional turbulence. And then there was the audience. Millions around the world, albeit unaware of the private dynamics, would one day witness the fallout. Public perception, media scrutiny, and the potential for scandal weighed heavily on him. Every reaction, every leak, every public statement would be magnified, dissected, and weaponized. Harry knew that navigating this minefield required careful calculation, balancing personal emotion with strategic foresight, empathy with resilience. And yet, even as he considered the ramifications, a primal instinct emerged, the instinct to protect, to fight, to survive. Harry was not passive. He had faced adversity before. He had survived public humiliation, media attacks, and personal loss. And now, confronted with a threat more intimate and profound than any before, he felt that same drive ignite within him. He would not go quietly. He would not relinquish his identity without a fight. But as Harry steeled himself for the coming confrontation, a chilling thought settled in. Princess Anne's words had been precise, calculated, and deliberate. There was no ambiguity, no room for negotiation. The king's wish was clear, and in that clarity lay the true horror. This was not a rumor. This was not speculation. This was a direct, personal, irrevocable command from his father, a command that could redefine everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and legacy. The clock was ticking. Every moment, every heartbeat, brought him closer to the inevitable confrontation. And as he sat there, processing the full weight of the decree, he realized one undeniable truth. Nothing would ever be the same. Not his relationship with his father, not his life within the monarchy, not the security of his family. Everything was on the precipice of change, and the plunge was imminent. But just as he began to formulate a plan, there was a subtle knock at the door, a messenger, carrying news that neither Harry nor Meghan could have predicted. Something hidden, something urgent, something that threatened to shift the balance of power entirely. And in that instant, Harry understood that the battle had only just begun. But what this messenger revealed next would leave them both stunned and set the stage for a confrontation that could shake the monarchy to its very core. Have you ever watched someone you love process life-altering news and felt the shock ripple through the air? Meghan Markle felt it firsthand that day. Harry was pacing, restless, a storm of emotion barely contained, and she could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. But while Harry reacted with raw, unfiltered shock, Meghan's response was different. She processed, calculated, and considered. Every thought was a strategy, every breath measured. And yet, underneath it all, there was an unmistakable personal hurt, a sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any headline, any public critique, any past controversy could ever touch. She moved across the room and placed a steadying hand on Harry's arm. "We can't just react," she said, voice firm, yet calm. Her eyes locked onto his, a mixture of reassurance and intensity. "This is bigger than us. This isn't just about titles. This is about control, legacy, and legacy being weaponized against us." Harry nodded, but Meghan could see the storm in his eyes, the rage, the confusion, the fear of losing everything he had known. What made Meghan's reaction so compelling was her ability to hold multiple layers of emotion simultaneously. She was angry, yes, furious at the injustice, at the audacity of a decree designed to strip them of identity and privilege. But she was also deeply concerned, for Harry, for herself, and most importantly, for their children. This was no longer a personal affront. It was a threat to their entire family structure. Lilibet and Archie, innocent yet profoundly affected by the ripples of royal tension, were at the center of a potential upheaval that could redefine their sense of security and belonging. And yet, Meghan's instinct was to act, not impulsively, but decisively. She began mapping out options, analyzing every angle. Legal avenues, media strategies, public statements, all needed to be considered. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Every choice she made now had consequences that could last a lifetime. And while Harry was consumed by immediate shock, Meghan was already thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating not only the palace's response but the public's reaction and the subtle maneuvering required to protect her family. The first step, she realized, was to absorb the full scope of what Princess Anne had revealed. The king's last wish was not just a suggestion. It was a formal, deliberate request, articulated with clarity and authority. Meghan understood that ignoring it, disputing it publicly, or reacting emotionally could exacerbate the situation beyond repair. Every move had to be calculated, precise, and layered with strategy. This wasn't a simple family dispute. It was a chess match, and the stakes were unimaginable. She remembered the private conversation she had had with a close friend just weeks earlier, before the revelation became official. "You have to understand," her friend had said. "In the royal world, perception is reality. One misstep, one uncalculated response, and the public narrative is fixed. Titles, status, all of it can vanish like smoke if you let them control the story." Meghan had nodded, but she now felt the weight of those words in real time. This was no theoretical exercise. This was happening, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Meghan's mind also wandered to historical context, to previous instances where royals had lost favor or been stripped of privileges. She knew of examples from decades past, distant cousins and titled relatives who had been quietly removed from the hierarchy, their stories buried under layers of discretion. But this was different. This was her husband's father, her children's grandfather, and the institution that framed their public and private lives. The personal and the political were now inseparably intertwined. As she paced the room, she thought about allies, both inside and outside the palace. Friends who had navigated royal protocols, legal experts familiar with constitutional and ceremonial nuances, public relations consultants who could help shape narrative perception. She knew that support was crucial, but even more crucial was timing. Acting too quickly could provoke retaliation. Acting too slowly could allow the palace to solidify its position. Every decision was a delicate balance between defense and strategy, emotion and calculation. Meghan also considered the media. The world was watching, even if they didn't yet know the details. One leak, one misinterpreted statement, could become a global headline. She understood the power of narrative. She knew that public perception could be as influential as legal authority. Controlling that perception would be a monumental task, but it was essential if they were to withstand the king's decree and protect their family. And yet, amid all this planning, Meghan allowed herself a moment of personal reflection. She thought about the years she had spent building a life with Harry, navigating public scrutiny, and advocating for causes she believed in. She had faced criticism, public attacks, and relentless media pressure. But this felt personal in a way that nothing else had. This was not the press. This was family. The very institution that had welcomed her was now positioning itself as a potential adversary, and the consequences were profound. Her thoughts returned to Harry. He had always been reactive, driven by emotion, and fiercely loyal. She loved that about him, but now, in this moment, she needed him to channel that loyalty strategically. She needed his courage, his insight, and his decisiveness, but tempered by foresight. Together, they had to confront a reality where every move could redefine their lives, their children's lives, and their public standing. Then came a startling realization. There was more at stake than just titles. Stripping Harry and Meghan of their royal status would affect not only their public image, but also their financial security, their legal privileges, and their ability to operate within certain institutional frameworks. They would face challenges that extended far beyond the palace walls, into media scrutiny, public expectation, and even international perception. This was not a contained problem. It was a multidimensional crisis, requiring meticulous attention and strategic foresight. Meghan's mind raced through scenarios. What if they challenged the decree legally? Would it spark a public feud, further eroding Harry's relationship with his father? Could they appeal to public sympathy, using media channels to build pressure on the palace? Or would that simply backfire, cementing the narrative that they were defying royal authority? Every possibility carried risks that were both tangible and psychological. And yet, Meghan felt a resolute clarity. Inaction was not an option. They had to act, not impulsively, but deliberately, strategically, and decisively. Her first step was to gather information, every document, every precedent, every conversation with aides, lawyers, and confidants. She began compiling a dossier, meticulously noting each legal implication, each potential public response, and every possible avenue for negotiation. She knew that knowledge was power, and that preparation would be their shield against the unpredictability of the monarchy. But even as Meghan strategized, a deeper emotional current ran beneath the surface. This was personal. This was intimate. And it was profoundly human. She felt hurt, not just on her own behalf, but for Harry, for their children, for the life they had painstakingly built together. It was a reminder that power, privilege, and titles could never fully insulate one from the emotional complexities of family, loyalty, and betrayal. As the day wore on, Meghan began to outline a plan, one that balanced assertiveness with discretion, public perception with private negotiation. She would need Harry's support, but she also needed to anticipate resistance, potential leaks, and the subtleties of palace politics. Every step had to be calculated, yet responsive to the rapidly evolving circumstances. She felt the weight of the task pressing down, yet a sense of determination steeled her resolve. They could face this challenge, but only if they moved with precision, unity, and foresight. And then, a sudden interruption. A confidential message slipped under the door, addressed to Meghan alone. She unfolded the note with care, eyes scanning quickly, heart racing. The message was brief but loaded. It contained information about a hidden document, a letter from Charles, that could dramatically alter the situation. It suggested leverage, a potential opening in a seemingly impenetrable decree. Her mind whirled. Could this be the opportunity they needed? Could it shift the balance in their favor? But the note also carried a warning. Timing was critical. Acting too soon could be catastrophic. Acting too late could close the door forever. Meghan's pulse quickened as she considered the implications. Every choice, every move, would now determine not just their immediate future, but the trajectory of their family, their legacy, and their public perception. The tension in the room was electric. Harry, unaware of the note, was consumed by his own whirlwind of emotions. Meghan held it close, weighing its potential and preparing for a strategic disclosure that could change everything. And in that delicate moment, the realization hit. They were no longer merely participants in family drama. They were players in a high-stakes battle that could define the monarchy itself. But before Meghan could share the contents of the message with Harry, there was a knock at the palace door. The messenger who entered carried news that neither Harry nor Meghan anticipated, a revelation that would force them to confront secrets deeper than the king's decree, secrets that could alter everything they thought they knew about their family, their roles, and the future of the monarchy. What would you do if a single piece of paper could change the fate of your entire family? For Harry and Meghan, that paper existed, hidden within the labyrinthine corridors of Buckingham Palace, a secret kept from public eyes and even from most senior staff. It was a letter penned by King Charles himself, a document so meticulously drafted that it balanced formality with deeply personal intention. And now, in Meghan's hands, it was no longer a secret. It was a lifeline, a key that could potentially rewrite the trajectory of their lives. The moment Meghan unfolded the letter, the weight of its contents struck her. Each sentence was precise, calculated, and intentional. The king's handwriting, familiar yet distant, conveyed both authority and vulnerability. Charles had anticipated resistance. He had foreseen the potential backlash. He had considered every possible legal loophole, every public reaction, every familial rupture that might follow his final decree. And yet, hidden within the document were subtle indications, clauses, phrasing, and coded language that suggested flexibility, opportunities for negotiation, and even a path to preserve some measure of title or privilege. Meghan's eyes scanned the lines repeatedly. "Harry," she said, urgency threading her voice, "you need to see this. This changes everything." Harry, still reeling from the earlier revelation, leaned in, anticipation and dread intertwining. The letter, once revealed, immediately commanded their full attention. Every word mattered. Every nuance carried weight. The king, despite his critical condition, had crafted a message that was both binding and strategically ambiguous, a dual-edged sword that could either save or destroy them. The document began formally, as expected. "To my beloved son and daughter-in-law, it is with both pride and concern that I address you regarding your place within the monarchy." But then, as Meghan read further, subtle cues emerged. Charles had embedded personal appeals amidst the legalese, reminders of family loyalty, historical precedent, and even hints of regret. He acknowledged past tensions, addressed potential misunderstandings, and even hinted at an underlying fear for the family's cohesion beyond his own mortality. Harry's brow furrowed as he took in the letter. It was as if the king had anticipated every emotional reaction, every defensive maneuver, and preemptively countered them. He's thinking 10 steps ahead," Harry muttered, awe and frustration mingling in his voice. Even now, in this state, he's controlling the board. Meghan nodded, recognizing the duality. The letter was a threat and a potential lifeline all at once. But there was more. Hidden in the margins were references to obscure clauses in royal protocol and succession law, details that could, if leveraged correctly, allow Harry and Meghan to retain limited titles or privileges without openly defying the king's decree. These references were subtle, almost cryptic, but unmistakable to those who knew where and how to look. Meghan's mind raced. This wasn't just a letter. It was a map, a puzzle, a strategic blueprint carefully concealed within layers of formality. The revelation sparked a flurry of planning. "We need legal counsel," Meghan said decisively. And discreetly, "This cannot leak. Not now, not ever. If the wrong person sees this, the leverage is gone." Harry nodded, determination hardening his features. The initial shock had begun to transform into action, a plan forming even amidst the uncertainty. They were no longer merely reacting. They were strategizing, poised to reclaim some measure of control in a situation that had initially seemed hopeless. And yet, even as they considered their next steps, an emotional undercurrent persisted. The letter was deeply personal, reflecting not only the king's authority, but his humanity. Harry felt a mixture of respect, resentment, and profound sorrow. Here was his father, lying in a hospital bed, struggling against illness, and still shaping the destiny of his children with meticulous precision. Meghan, equally moved, recognized the delicate balance, the challenge of honoring the king's wishes while also safeguarding their own family's future. The situation became more complex when an unexpected call came from an insider within the palace. A long-trusted aide, someone with years of experience and discretion, warned them that there were factions within the monarchy ready to interpret the letter in the strictest possible way. "They will push for immediate enforcement," the aide whispered. "You must act carefully. Every word, every gesture, every decision will be scrutinized. Misstep, and the consequences are irreversible." Meghan's mind raced, weighing options, assessing risk, and considering how to move forward without triggering a counteraction that could backfire catastrophically. Harry and Meghan realized they were now navigating multiple dimensions simultaneously. The king's emotional and strategic intentions, the palace power dynamics, the potential public fallout, and the security of their children. Each layer added complexity, each decision carried weight, and each moment demanded precision. The letter, once a secret, had become the fulcrum around which the entire next chapter of their lives would pivot. And then, just as they began formulating a cautious plan, a subtle but startling detail caught Meghan's eye. A line, almost imperceptible, hinted at a contingency. The king had secretly instructed Princess and to oversee a confidential meeting that could potentially mediate the decree if approached correctly. This was unexpected, a glimmer of hope embedded in an otherwise threatening document. Meghan's pulse quickened. Could this meeting be the key to preserving some measure of their royal identity without provoking the full force of Charles's authority? But the implications were immediate. Acting on this contingency required precision, discretion, and timing. Misstep could provoke an irreversible confrontation, while delay could close the door entirely. Meghan shared the discovery with Harry, and together they realized the stakes had escalated. This wasn't simply a private family matter. It was now a chessboard with pieces moving invisibly, where strategy, timing, and emotional intelligence were paramount. As they prepared to consider their next steps, a subtle knock at the door interrupted the moment. Another palace aide appeared, this one visibly anxious, carrying a small, sealed envelope. "For your eyes only," the aide whispered. Meghan exchanged a glance with Harry. They knew immediately this was connected to the letter, a follow-up, an addendum, or possibly a warning about the enforcement of the king's decree. Every instinct told them to proceed carefully. Every nerve was alert. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note, brief but loaded with implication. It confirmed that certain aspects of the decree were flexible, contingent on private negotiation and strategic compliance. But it also warned that timing was critical, that exposure could be dangerous, and that any misinterpretation would result in immediate enforcement. The message was clear: one wrong move, and the king's final wish could be executed fully, erasing them from the monarchy entirely. The room fell silent. Harry and Meghan exchanged a long look, equal parts determination, fear, and resolve. They understood the delicate balance they now had to maintain: honor the king's wishes, protect their family, navigate palace politics, and anticipate public scrutiny, all while planning their next move. The weight of the situation was crushing, yet a spark of opportunity had emerged amidst the tension. But as they began to consider contacting Princess and to explore the contingency hinted at in the letter, an unexpected twist emerged. A palace insider reported that certain factions were already moving to interpret the king's decree in the strictest possible sense, potentially preempting any negotiation. The clock was ticking, and every second heightened the risk. Harry and Meghan realized that the path forward was now more treacherous than ever, and the battle to protect their family and titles was just beginning. And that is when the unexpected happened. A private meeting, arranged in secrecy, would soon take place, revealing information that could completely shift the balance of power within the royal family. Have you ever wondered what it's like to sit across from someone who knows more than you could ever imagine? Someone whose words could shift your entire future in an instant? That's exactly where Harry and Meghan found themselves in the hidden chambers of Buckingham Palace, minutes after receiving the secret letters and whispered warnings. Princess and the unflinching enforcer of royal protocol and confidant to King Charles awaited them with a calm demeanor that belied the storm brewing in the room. The room itself was austere, dark wood panels, a single chandelier casting muted light, and a large, polished table that separated them physically but seemed to heighten the psychological tension. Anne's presence was commanding. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she studied them both, eyes piercing, taking in every micro-expression, every tremor in their posture. She knew why they were here. They knew she knew. And in that silence, the weight of the monarchy pressed down like a tangible force. Finally, she spoke. "You've read the letter," she began, voice low but deliberate. "And you understand the gravity of my father's wishes." There was no question in her tone, no room for debate. Harry and Meghan nodded, absorbing the unspoken message that the next steps would require absolute precision, loyalty, and courage. Anne's words were measured, each syllable deliberate. She explained the contingency embedded within the king's decree, a private clause that could allow negotiation, provided they followed the palace's strict protocol. But there was a catch. Any public disclosure, any hint of dissent, or any misstep could trigger full enforcement of the decree, stripping them of all titles immediately. The room felt smaller with every word, every possibility weighed and calculated in the silent air between them. Meghan leaned forward, her fingers interlaced. "And we want to respect the king's wishes," she said, her voice steady. "But we need to understand what options exist. We need clarity on what can be negotiated, on what is irreversible, and how to protect the children." Her words weren't just polite, they were tactical. Every phrase was designed to elicit information without provoking conflict, a subtle balance between diplomacy and assertiveness. And regarded her thoughtfully. "The king's wishes are clear," she replied, "but he is also concerned with the well-being of his family. That concern is not openly expressed, but it exists. If approached correctly, with discretion and respect, there is a pathway that could preserve elements of your identity within the monarchy. But it will require patience, tact, and absolute confidentiality. One misstep, and all leverage is lost." Harry's jaw tightened. "We need specifics," he said. "What exactly can be preserved? Titles, privileges, access to family events? We need to know what we're negotiating for before we make any moves." His tone was edged with urgency, the raw emotion of a son facing potential erasure. Anne's calm gaze did not waver. She outlined the framework carefully. There were limited titles that could be retained in a modified capacity, ceremonial roles that could be preserved, and protections for their children that could be negotiated. But every concession had conditions: adherence to protocol, public discretion, and a clear demonstration of respect for the monarchy's traditions. And emphasized that the king's approval was implicit but contingent, meaning that every action would be scrutinized, every word interpreted, and any perceived breach could void the agreement entirely. Meghan absorbed the information with surgical precision. Every clause, every caveat, every implicit expectation was noted mentally. She began considering strategies for compliance that would not undermine their autonomy while still honoring the king's conditions. It was a delicate dance, one that required forethought, precision, and an acute awareness of palace politics. Harry, meanwhile, was wrestling with the emotional ramifications. Respecting the king's wishes while confronting the personal sting of potential erasure was a psychological balancing act. Anger, disappointment, love, and duty collided in a storm of conflicting emotions. He realized that any negotiation was not merely a tactical maneuver. It was also a test of emotional resilience, a trial of character in front of the most scrutinizing audience imaginable, the monarchy itself. As the meeting progressed and revealed another startling detail, a small but influential faction within the palace was already mobilizing to enforce the king's decree strictly. These individuals were loyal to protocol and tradition above personal relationships, and they had the power to act swiftly. The message was clear: time was critical. Any delay or hesitation could allow them to act unilaterally, eliminating the opportunity for negotiation and sealing Harry and Meghan's fate. Meghan's mind raced. They needed to act decisively, yet with extreme caution. One misstep could trigger full enforcement of the decree. She began mentally outlining the next moves, securing legal counsel, preparing a negotiation strategy, and controlling information flow within the palace to prevent leaks. Every decision had consequences, and every consequence could reshape the narrative of their family forever. And, observing their reactions, allowed a rare moment of vulnerability. She revealed the personal dimension of her father's decision, the fear, the urgency, and the underlying love that informed it. Charles, despite his critical condition, was concerned with maintaining the integrity of the monarchy, but he was also deeply aware of the emotional bonds and potential fallout for his children. His disclosure humanized the decree, showing that it was not purely punitive but entwined with complex family dynamics, tradition, and duty. The tension in the room was palpable. Harry and Meghan realized that while the decree was formidable, the secret meeting had opened a window, a chance to influence the outcome without directly defying the king. But the pathway was narrow, fraught with risk, and dependent on timing, discretion, and precise communication. Any error could be catastrophic. Just as the meeting was drawing to a close, and added a final, unexpected detail, the king had secretly authorized a mediator, a trusted advisor with unparalleled knowledge of palace operations, who could facilitate the negotiation if Harry and Meghan approached correctly. This revelation was shocking. It suggested that, despite the harshness of the decree, Charles had left a lifeline, albeit a fragile one, to prevent total estrangement. Harry and Meghan exchanged a glance, a mixture of relief and renewed urgency. The stakes were higher than ever, but now a strategy was possible. They had a roadmap, a secret pathway, and a potential ally in the shadows. The key would be timing, discretion, and careful execution. But as they left the meeting room, a subtle yet ominous feeling lingered. Unknown to them, palace factions had already begun maneuvering behind the scenes. Decisions were being made, interpretations drawn, and contingency plans crafted that could either support or undermine any negotiation effort. The game was no longer theoretical. It had begun in earnest, and every move would be watched, every word analyzed, every gesture interpreted. And just as they stepped into the dim corridor, a whispered message reached Meghan's ear from an unseen source. The next revelation, hidden deep within palace archives, could either solidify their leverage or obliterate it entirely. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the next twist was about to explode onto the scene. What secrets lie behind the locked doors of Buckingham Palace, away from public view, away from prying eyes, and even away from most of the royal family? For Harry and Meghan, the answer to that question was about to become crucial. After their secret meeting with Princess Anne, they had been tipped off to an archive, hidden, restricted, and containing documents that had never been seen by outsiders. These archives were rumored to hold correspondence, decrees, and private notes from generations of monarchs, including King Charles himself. And now, a key to their survival, or potential doom, rested within them. The entrance to the archive was unassuming, tucked behind an old oak panel in a rarely used hallway. Only a handful of senior palace officials knew of its existence, and entry required both formal permission and discreet timing. Meghan, understanding the gravity, coordinated with a trusted aide who had secured temporary access. Every step had to be precise. A misstep could alert palace factions already eager to enforce the king's decree. Harry followed closely, a mixture of anticipation and tension radiating from him. They had prepared for months, yet nothing could truly prepare them for the emotional weight of this moment. Each creak of the floorboards, each echoing footstep, amplified the gravity of what they were about to uncover. They were entering a space where history, power, and family secrets converged, where the past could be weaponized or leveraged, and where a single misinterpretation could seal their fate. Inside, the room was massive, lined with towering shelves that reached the ceiling, stacked with leather-bound ledgers, official documents, and private letters spanning centuries. The air smelled faintly of parchment and aged ink, a tangible reminder that they were now standing amidst the recorded history of their family, both the glory and the shadows. Meghan's fingers brushed against the spine of an old book as she moved past the shelves, absorbing the quiet, oppressive aura of tradition and secrecy. They began their search methodically. Guided by Princess Anne's hints and the cryptic notes from the secret letter, they sought documents that could shed light on the king's intentions and potentially reveal clauses that might protect them. Every file they opened, every envelope they unfolded, was a potential revelation. Some contained mundane ceremonial instructions, others detailed intricate family arrangements, and a few held personal correspondence that hinted at Charles's internal struggles. And then they found it. A folder marked with the king's private insignia, nearly hidden behind decades-old documents. Meghan's heart raced as she carefully opened it. Inside were letters, handwritten and typewritten, spanning several years. They detailed Charles's concerns about the monarchy's future, his anxieties regarding family loyalty, and, most shockingly, explicit instructions up. And then they found it. A folder marked with the king's private insignia, nearly hidden behind decades-old documents. Meghan's heart raced as she carefully opened it. Inside were letters, handwritten and typewritten, spanning several years. They detailed Charles's concerns about the monarchy's future, his anxieties regarding family loyalty, and, most shockingly, explicit instructions about contingencies for Harry and Meghan. One passage, nearly buried in legal phrasing, suggested that while the king wished for their removal from certain titles, he had simultaneously drafted measures to protect their children and preserve elements of their legacy, if approached correctly. Harry's eyes widened. This changes everything, he whispered. It's not just a decree. It's a roadmap, hidden in plain sight. Meghan nodded, understanding immediately. The king, even in his illness, had thought ahead. He had anticipated conflict, resistance, and public fallout, and yet he had left a lifeline, a fragile, carefully constructed path that could allow them to navigate the storm without outright rebellion. But the revelations didn't stop there. Mixed within the letters were notes on other family members' reactions, potential palace allies, and even coded messages regarding factions that might either support or sabotage their efforts. The depth of planning was staggering. It was as if Charles had foreseen every contingency, calculated every risk, and embedded guidance that only the most attentive and careful recipients could decode. Meghan began taking meticulous notes, cataloging each detail, cross-referencing them with the secret letter and the insights from Princess Anne. She knew that any misstep in interpreting the documents could be catastrophic. This was not merely historical research. It was strategic intelligence gathering at the highest stakes. Each decision now carried immense weight, and every error could tip the balance toward full enforcement of the king's decree. And then, a chilling realization struck both of them. Someone else might already know about these archives. Rumors had circulated for years of palace factions seeking leverage, quietly digging into historical records to manipulate outcomes. If word of their presence in the archive leaked, it could provoke immediate action to remove their titles preemptively. The urgency of discretion became starkly apparent. They were not only navigating the contents of the documents, but also the unseen eyes and ears within the palace walls. Amidst the tension, Meghan uncovered a specific set of correspondences that referenced meetings between Charles and senior advisors regarding Harry and Meghan's potential removal. These documents revealed prior discussions, internal disagreements, and the king's insistence on a measured approach, balancing family loyalty with institutional stability. It became clear that the king's desire to strip them of titles was as much about preserving the monarchy as it was about personal judgment. Harry, meanwhile, discovered personal letters from Charles to his own advisors, reflecting worry, frustration, and even moments of remorse. These letters painted a complex portrait of a man struggling with illness, authority, and legacy. He wasn't simply acting out of cruelty. He was grappling with the immense pressure of maintaining tradition, family cohesion, and public perception. And yet, the personal stakes for Harry were undeniable. The potential erasure of identity, privilege, and familial connection loomed large. The deeper they delved, the more they realized the archive held not just facts, but leverage, strategically vital information that could influence the king's final decisions. Every discovery added a piece to the puzzle. Potential legal loopholes, interpretive ambiguities, and subtle indications of who might be persuaded or manipulated within the palace to support a negotiated outcome. But as they pieced together the information, a new and urgent challenge emerged. A confidential note, slipped into one of the folders without their noticing, revealed that certain factions were planning a preemptive move. They intended to enforce the king's decree swiftly, bypassing any negotiation and leaving Harry and Meghan vulnerable. The window for action was closing rapidly. Timing had become not just important but critical. Every moment now carried escalating consequences, and the pressure intensified with each passing second. Meghan and Harry realized that uncovering the archives was only the beginning. Knowledge alone was insufficient. They needed to act decisively, formulate a strategic plan, and anticipate the palace's reactions before these factions moved. Their next steps would require precision, coordination, and an understanding of both the historical context and the current political landscape within the royal family. And just as they prepared to leave the archives, the unexpected happened. A secret compartment within the room clicked open, revealing another envelope addressed directly to Harry. Its contents were undisclosed, but hinted at critical information that could either save their titles or accelerate their removal. Have you ever held a letter in your hands and felt the air itself shift around you? For Harry, that moment arrived in Buckingham Palace's hidden archives. The envelope, unassuming yet heavy with implication, rested in his palm as he broke the seal. Meghan leaned close, her heartbeat synchronized with his. Neither spoke. The silence was deafening, filled with anticipation and dread. Every second stretched longer than the last. Inside, the paper was crisp, elegant, and unmistakably penned with authority. The handwriting was familiar, King Charles himself. But this was no ordinary note. It was a document that contained explicit instructions, contingencies, and revelations so profound that they could rewrite everything Harry and Meghan thought they knew about their positions, their family, and even the king's intentions. The first lines were formal yet immediately unsettling. To my son, Harry, and my daughter-in-law, Meghan, this correspondence supplements my earlier directives. While my wishes are clear regarding your titles, there exist circumstances under which reconsideration is not only possible but necessary. The words, seemingly contradictory, sent a ripple of shock through both of them. Reconsideration? After being told their royal identities were being stripped away? Harry's brow furrowed. Reconsideration, what does he mean? Meghan didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the document, absorbing every nuance. The letter continued, outlining conditions that were both strict and unexpectedly flexible. There were legal pathways, clauses referencing historical precedent, and procedural loopholes that, if leveraged correctly, could allow them to retain elements of their status. But then came the most shocking revelation. The letter revealed that certain members of the royal council had been instructed to protect Harry and Meghan from immediate enforcement. This was a safeguard embedded by the king himself, a contingency that few knew about, and even fewer could access without triggering scrutiny. Harry and Meghan exchanged incredulous glances. They had assumed the decree was absolute. But here was evidence that, even in his critical condition, the king had left room for negotiation, provided they approached it with discretion and respect. Meghan's mind raced. This changes everything. It's not just a decree to strip us. It's a blueprint, a negotiation disguised as a punishment. She pointed to a section detailing how allies within the palace could be engaged to mediate discussions discreetly. We have intermediaries, she whispered. If we play this right, we could retain influence, protect the kids, and even salvage some titles. Harry, however, was torn between relief and anger. The revelation of the hidden contingencies made him question everything. Why were they being forced to navigate this labyrinth of secrecy and conditional leverage? Why did the king insist on a public perception of absolute authority while privately leaving loopholes? And most importantly, why hadn't this information reached them sooner, preventing weeks of uncertainty and emotional turmoil? The letter addressed all of these questions with a subtle complexity only Charles could wield. It revealed the king's fears, that a public dispute could irreparably damage the monarchy, that sensational media coverage could distort family narratives, and that internal palace factions could exploit any perceived weakness. Charles's solution was surgical. Create the appearance of a firm decree while embedding private channels for negotiation, ensuring loyalty, discretion, and strategic control. But even with this revelation, the letter contained a dire warning. Any misstep, any leak, any public display of dissent could trigger immediate enforcement. The room seemed to shrink around Harry and Meghan as the implications settled. Every action they took from this point forward could either protect their family or accelerate the loss of titles, privileges, and security. Meghan immediately began drafting mental strategies. She considered how to engage allies discreetly, how to leverage historical precedents without attracting attention, and how to prepare Harry emotionally for the negotiations ahead. The stakes were now clearer than ever. This was not simply about titles or recognition. It was about controlling the narrative, preserving family integrity, and outmaneuvering palace factions intent on enforcing the king's wishes swiftly. Then came the most shocking line of all, buried deep within the margins, almost like a footnote. The king had specified that should Harry or Meghan fail to comply with the hidden procedure, not only would titles be stripped, but certain privileges, financial, ceremonial, and legal, could be immediately revoked. The consequences were severe and irreversible. Harry felt the weight of the warning in his chest, the gravity of the situation pressing down with a visceral intensity. Meghan, sensing his rising anxiety, placed a hand on his arm. "We have the information now," she said firmly. "We know what the king wants, and we know how to navigate it. We can't panic. Every move must be precise, every word measured. This is our chance to survive this and protect the kids." Harry nodded, the storm inside him simmering into focus and determination. And just as they began discussing next steps, another subtle detail emerged from the letter. An instruction for a clandestine meeting with a high-ranking palace advisor, someone with the authority to mediate and enforce the hidden contingencies. The meeting was to be arranged immediately, with extreme discretion. This wasn't just a procedural note, it was a signal, a lifeline, a test. The tension escalated. Harry and Meghan realized that every second now counted. They had uncovered the king's secret plan, but the clock was ticking. Palace factions were already moving, and any delay could jeopardize their leverage entirely. The stakes were monumental. Family, legacy, public perception, and their children's security all hinged on the choices they were about to make. Before leaving the archives, Meghan paused, glancing at Harry. "Are we ready for what comes next?" she asked. Her voice carried a mix of resolve and apprehension. Harry met her gaze, determination hardening his expression. "We don't have a choice," he said. "We play it smart. We play it fast. And we survive." But as they exited the room, the air shifted. Unseen eyes watched from the shadows, palace factions moving quietly to counteract any advantage Harry and Meghan might claim. The secret envelope had revealed their potential lifeline, but it had also set the stage for a confrontation that no one had anticipated. The first question that hit Harry and Meghan as they prepared for the clandestine negotiation was simple but terrifying. How do you sit across from someone who wields your fate like a weapon and expect to emerge unscathed? The high-ranking palace advisor awaiting them was known for discretion, influence, and an unwavering loyalty to tradition. In short, they were about to face someone who could make or break everything they had fought to protect. The meeting was arranged in a small, windowless room tucked away in one of the palace's lesser-used wings. The ambience was intentionally austere. A long polished table, 2 chairs facing each other, a faint scent of aged wood and leather, and the soft hum of palace security systems just beyond the walls. Every detail was designed to remind visitors of the authority seated behind the facade. Meghan felt the tension coil in her chest as she and Harry entered, their steps echoing softly on the marble floor. The advisor, impeccably dressed and radiating calm authority, gestured for them to sit. Their eyes were sharp, assessing every movement, every micro-expression, every hint of emotional fluctuation. Meghan recognized immediately that this person had seen countless high-stakes situations, had mediated crises that spanned decades, and could anticipate reactions before they occurred. "Good," the advisor began, voice measured but commanding. "You have the king's letter. You understand the gravity of your situation. No introduction, no small talk, just a direct acknowledgement of the stakes." Harry and Meghan nodded. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Every moment here could tilt the balance. Every misstep could trigger irreversible consequences. The negotiation began with careful precision. The advisor laid out the known parameters. The king's wish to strip Harry and Meghan of certain titles, the contingencies allowing for partial retention, and the strict conditions under which any negotiation would be entertained. They emphasized that secrecy was paramount. Even the smallest leak could provoke immediate enforcement. Meghan understood immediately that this was a high-wire act. One false move, and the consequences would be devastating. Harry leaned forward, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "We want to respect the king's wishes," he said, "but we need clarity. What exactly can be preserved, and under what conditions?" The advisor's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with scrutiny. They were measuring every word, evaluating intent, assessing risk. The discussion delved into specific titles, ceremonial privileges, and even legal nuances embedded in historical precedent. Meghan's analytical mind raced, cataloging each detail, noting loopholes, and preparing contingencies. She could see the pathways forming, delicate yet navigable, but they were narrow and fraught with peril. One misinterpretation, one misstep, and the lifeline could snap. Then came the first twist. The advisor revealed that certain factions within the palace, loyal to tradition above all else, were already preparing to interpret the king's decree in the strictest possible sense. They were not waiting for negotiation. They were acting preemptively, ready to strip titles and privileges immediately if Harry and Meghan faltered. The revelation was chilling. Time was not on their side. Every second, every choice mattered. Meghan swallowed hard, her mind calculating the risks. "We have to control the narrative," she said quietly. "We need allies inside, people who understand the hidden contingencies and can act discreetly." The advisor gave a subtle nod, acknowledging the strategy without overtly confirming it. This was the delicate dance. They were navigating a minefield, where words alone could trigger catastrophic outcomes. Harry, his frustration barely contained, pressed further. "Why the secrecy? Why not be direct?" The advisor's reply was chillingly rational. Public dissent could destabilize the monarchy, spark media frenzy, and irrevocably damage family reputation. The king's approach was strategic, designed to maintain appearances while leaving room for controlled negotiation. Harry realized in that moment that the monarchy operated on a level far beyond personal grievances. Every action, every document, every decision was calculated to preserve legacy, tradition, and perception. As the negotiation progressed, Meghan uncovered a critical detail. A clause buried in the king's letter referenced specific allowances for children's protection, privileges that could be preserved if approached correctly. The advisor confirmed this subtly, emphasizing that any misuse or public disclosure would void the entire provision. Meghan's pulse quickened. Here was leverage, fragile but tangible, a way to protect their family even while navigating the king's severe decree. The tension was relentless. Every question they asked, every clarification sought, required careful phrasing. The advisor responded with measured ambiguity, offering guidance without revealing unnecessary details. It was a psychological chess match. Meghan felt her mind sharpen, analyzing every inflection, every pause, every subtle cue that could indicate hidden meanings. Harry, though emotional, focused on the stakes, understanding that the next moves would determine not only their titles, but their legacy and family security. Then, just as a tentative plan began to form, the advisor delivered a final, unexpected piece of information. The king had preemptively arranged for a private review of all potential enforcement actions, meaning that any faction attempting to act prematurely could be overruled, but only if Harry and Meghan demonstrated absolute compliance with protocol and secrecy. It was both an opportunity and a warning. The lifeline was real, but it was razor-thin, requiring perfect execution. Meghan and Harry left the room, their minds a storm of strategy, emotion, and anticipation. They understood the rules, the hidden pathways, and the timing required. But they also knew that the palace factions were moving in parallel, unseen and calculating. The next phase would demand precision, courage, and resilience. Every action now could have monumental consequences. As they stepped into the corridor, a whispered warning reached them from an unseen aide. One faction had already begun mobilizing documents and preparing a public announcement to preempt any negotiation. The countdown had begun. Harry and Meghan realized, with chilling clarity, that the negotiation was no longer theoretical. It was a race against unseen forces within the palace itself. And in that moment, a new revelation arrived. A hidden communication from the king hinted at a secret ally, someone positioned at the very heart of the palace, who could tip the scales in their favor, but only if approached with absolute trust and discretion. The game had escalated, the stakes had multiplied, and the next move would determine the fate of not just